that we are now seen to be duplicitous, we are seen to be arrogant, and this has a history. At critical historical moments, Kenya has always taken the wrong turn and wrong decisions in the manner in which we deal with African issues or even world issues. If you permit me, take you to history a little. During the apartheid regime in South Africa, we appeared to behave as if we supported the apartheid regime.
This is the journey to one Africa.
The world and a country like South Africa, which is rich in resources, is a country that trades with the United States of America, and how you deal with land may very well have implications on how they are going to access these important minerals. You are talking uranium, you are talking lithium, you are talking cobalt, you are talking gold.
Hi everyone and welcome to Fanya Mambo Africa. Today's episode is exciting. I mean, it's always exciting when I host Professor P.L.O. Lumumba here. One, because he's a Pan-Africanist. Secondly, he is a man who understands the politics of Kenya, the politics of the region that's African, and of course the geopolitics space. And at this point, it's inevitable to host him because of what happened in Ethiopia the other day for Kenya, and of course, what is happening across the world. And above all, just a lesson today, we want to understand what Kenya's foreign policy means and diplomacy and how we should go about that. Prof, karibu sana.
Asante sana.
You know, we spoke about Raila's election in somewhere last year, and your prophecy came to life. And a lot of people are questioning what could have gone wrong. I don't know from your end what.
You know, it does not go wrong. It starts wrong. And that is the basis on which we made some of the statements that we made in the month of December. Remember, this was not the first time that Kenya was fielding a candidate for the position of the AUC chairperson. We had done so when Amina Mohammed was a candidate against the now former chair Mahamat Faki of Chad. And even during that campaign, the Kenyan campaign was loud, it was, in our view, uncoordinated, and it did not address the critical issues relating to that particular position. But the campaign that was mounted on behalf of Mr. Raila Odinga was even worse. And it was worse because, number one, the candidate himself was stating to his constituency that he was going to be the president of Africa. Yet the position that was up for grabs, so to speak, is a position of the head of the secretariat and somebody who does the heavy lifting for the African Union. And you could see that our candidate, unlike all the other candidates, was meeting every head of state and every head of government, or tried to do so. And when they were granted audience as a matter of courtesy, they misinterpreted that to mean that they had received the endorsement of those countries. And it is also instructive that during that very same period, Kenya as a country was making certain mistakes in how it was conducting a number of diplomatic issues in the region. How did we deal with the question of the DRC Congo? How did we deal with the question of Sudan? And how did we deal with the question of Somalia? And even beyond the region, how did we respond to the war in Ukraine? How did we respond to the war in Gaza? It is a combination of these factors that was sending a very clear message to the neighborhood and to those who are interested that we are a country that was not conducting ourselves in a manner that is in the best interest of the continent of Africa. We, I think, have even offered to host a meeting of La Francophonie, the former French colonies in Nairobi, sometimes in the year 2026. All these factors conjoined served to send a message that was not very palatable to those who are dyed-in-the-wool Pan-Africanists. And in addition to that, in the run-up to the election, and I can confirm that I was myself at the University of Addis Ababa on the 11th day of February, the year 2025, you could see the advanced delegation of Kenyans from different parts of government or different ministries present in Addis Ababa, behaving as if the elections were a formality, and that the Kenyan candidate was going to be coronated, as it were. And of course, that was a mistake. Compare that campaign with the very disciplined, diplomatic, quiet, subterranean campaign by the candidate from Madagascar and the candidate from Djibouti, and see how they presented themselves. They knew that the position that is up for grabs is a position of service to the continent. And lastly, the Kenyan candidate was being marketed in a manner that suggested that we were solving a domestic political problem by exiling that candidate so that he is off the Kenyan territory in the run-up to the presidential elections in the year 2027. All these factors served to undermine that candidate and to depict our country in a very negative light.
So the question is, when we saw these factors are many, and most maybe Kenyans don't understand how that goes. But from where you sit and how that space goes, when you look at how Raila Odinga spoke to all these leaders across, when we look at how President Ruto spoke to all these leaders, does it mean by the time you're meeting these leaders, you're never assured, or is it a thing of everything you've done comes to the culmination of this?
You know, every head of state and head of government receives intelligence, and they do that which is in the best interest of the country. So the mere fact that you are granted audience by a particular leader and all the diplomatic courtesies are extended to you does not mean that you have been endorsed. Remember, unknown to us, the other candidates may also have been approaching, and I know they were approaching those very same leaders, the individuals that we were talking about in competition with Mr. Odinga. Madagascar, a former long-serving foreign minister, the candidate from Djibouti, a foreign minister who was served for over 20 years and therefore is an astute diplomat who speaks several languages and has rapport with his ministerial colleagues. And they were doing these things very quietly, not with the noise and the razzmatazz that attended Mr. Odinga's entry into the arena, complete with his being launched, and I'm using the word launched because it's Kenyanese, by the head of state. All these things don't send a very good message, and it is a question of misinterpretation of diplomatic courtesies that countries extend to each other.
And something else that happened now that you've gone to the foreign affairs minister sector, we had the PS saying that the statement that was issued by SADC about supporting Madagascar on the last, I think, a day two, was just, he dismissed it and said it was just a formality. How does that impact how these SADC nations actually look at Kenya and also Africa at large?
How in good conscience can you make a statement saying that a formal statement issued by a regional body such as SADC with nearly 18 members is just a formality, and you are not a member of SADC? Such a statement must have been made after thorough consultation with heads of states and heads of government. Therefore, it was not a formality. It was a position that was being taken by the SADC region to support a country that is in their neighborhood. And to poo-poo the statement as was being done by our Kenyan bureaucrats is in itself a demonstration that we have contempt for others, and that cannot be taken kindly.
And somehow a lot of conversations have said that Kenya bulldozes everyone else and we feel important in the diplomatic African space. What led to that, and how is that affecting now our relationships with other African countries?
In diplomatic speak, there is something that is referred to as the Nairobi mentality. The Nairobi mentality means that Kenyans deal with others with hubris and arrogance. And that arrogance must have stemmed from the fact, number one, that geopolitically our country is significant to the rest of the world and has been significant particularly to the Western world and to the United States, including the United States of America. The other thing is that we are the host of a number of United Nations organizations, the third most important capital for the United Nations after New York and Geneva, and the leading in the African continent. And that has not made our leaders very humble. And for that reason, we are laboring under the Nairobi mentality, and we sometimes treat our neighbors with contempt, and we run roughshod over them. And when the opportunity arises, they too can retaliate in the manner that indeed they retaliated during these elections of the AUC chair.
So that was one of the ways of people communicating and saying Nairobi mentality needs to come to a halt, sort of.
Yes, absolutely. The Nairobi mentality ought to be consigned to the museums of history so that you deal with people on the basis of equality and mutual respect. And if you do that, you'll discover that the suspicion that governs how our neighbors relate with us will disappear.
When I look at the factors you've stated, hosting maybe some of the biggest offices, UN, and considering now we have President Trump at the US, will we still keep this mentality, or does that Trump presidency then have a net effect on how our diplomacy works, even if we still have the idea that we host UN?
The jury is still out as to how the Trump administration will relate with Kenya. But remember that during the Biden administration, Kenya was also inducted as a non-NATO ally. And that was further massaging the egos of our political leadership. And we thought that we, in a manner of speaking, are the blue-eyed boys of the Western world. But you can already begin to see that the Trump administration is not reading from the same script. So it is very important that we as a country, through our political leadership, begin to re-examine how we conduct our diplomacy. And this is critical because it is not something just for the president or those who are serving. It is about how we as Kenyans are treated by our neighbors and treated by the rest of the world. If our neighbors think that we are not pulling in the same direction as they are, then it is we, the citizens of the Republic of Kenya, that will suffer the pain.
Some of the factors that people would question about how we are pulling as Kenya would be how we reacted when Raila Odinga lost. We had some MPs, and actually I think most of them were MPs, quoting that it's time to reconsider how AUC is structured. Maybe we need to divide. Maybe we need to pull out of that as EAC. What does all this, because sometimes I imagine maybe they imagine the online space does not have a net effect on the international diplomatic space. What do these such statements have to do with how then we relate with AU and our neighbors?
You know, those were very unfortunate statements fortunately, one can say that these were unofficial statements. One can argue that the President of the Republic of Kenya congratulated the winner. One can say that the candidate himself conceded defeat and said that it was a product of a democratic process. One can say that. But sometimes there may be official statements which are made, then you allow your lackeys to say the thing that you actually want to say. And those who are very unfortunate, when you say, for example, because our candidate has lost an election, then it is a reason for reducing our contribution to a continental body or withdrawing from the continental body, you are saying it is either our way or the highway, as the saying goes. And these are statements that are unfortunate, they are juvenile, and they ought to be retracted with a formal official statement. When you say, for example, that the loss of your candidate is Africa's loss, what are you saying?
And someone could argue that is official because it came from the president.
Unfortunately, you don't want to make such statements. And I hope that going forward, we are going to ensure that communication is coordinated. Because when you are dealing with matters of diplomacy, the coordination and coherence of communication is very critical. Because these are things that go on record, and the country is then judged by the statements that are made by the politicians.
And maybe the president too, for that matter.
The president in real terms is the chief diplomat of any country.
So President Ruto, having said that statement immediately, I think it was on the dinner, what does that now say to even maybe people who had voted for us?
You know, one thing happens, that you may think that you have different messages for different audiences, if you may, that for the international audience you are all diplomatic, but for your domestic audience you are also pandering to domestic politics. But at the end of the day, if you engage in doublespeak of that kind, then it tells a clear message to those who are dealing with you that you are duplicitous and that you cannot be trusted. And that is unfortunate for our country, that we are now seen to be duplicitous, we are seen to be arrogant, and this has a history. At critical historical moments, Kenya has always taken the wrong turn and wrong decisions in the manner in which we deal with African issues or even world issues. If you permit me, take you to history a little. During the apartheid regime in South Africa, we appeared to behave as if we supported the apartheid regime. And it is not only that. When we have had situations where we ought to be clear, the Sahrawi, Southwest African issue, we also appeared to make statements and make suggestions and took decisions that undermined the status of Sahrawi or Southwest African or Southern Sahara. And beyond that, you've seen the manner in which we have conducted ourselves on the Gaza issue. While we condemn the abductions on 7th of October, the genocidal, and that has now been decided by the International Court of Justice and other independent observers of the State of Israel, we have been seen to be taking sides in that regard. And all these things are not good. And even as I speak to you, we appear to be accommodating rebel regimes. We appear to be a country where when people come here, then they are abducted. Nnamdi Kanu of Nigeria was abducted from here. Kizza Besigye was abducted from here. Abdallah Öcalan of Turkey was abducted from here. And that is not good. It is not good for our image. It is not good for our country. And I think the time is now that we as a country must define what our diplomatic orientation is if we are to be trusted in this region. Because geopolitically, this is an important country in the continent of Africa.
And that cannot be ignored.
Absolutely.
However, Prof, as you say, the time is now. It's very I don't know to say unfortunate that we are speaking a day after the Sudan, what is the group called? RFS, was doing a signing at a very central part in CBD, the KICC, which is also a government entity. And these are people who are condemned the other day for genocide, but they are here trying to sign to form a parallel government of Sudan. When all these things happen, then what does it mean? And considering that Kenya had been rejected as a peace negotiator because of taking sides, which now openly looks like it's open, we're on this side.
You know, and this is not the first time that we were rejected in Sudan. We were rejected in La Côte d'Ivoire during the administration of Laurent Gbagbo. We were held in suspicion in the DR Congo when the Kenyan process was ignored and the Luanda-Angola process was given prominence. It sends a very bad message that we are providing succor to an organization. These are the Janjaweed who have killed people, and it is on record. And we are accommodating them here at a time when they are facing investigation by the International Criminal Court. And then we dare say that we are a democratic country and we cannot stop people from making statements. Why did we not allow Kizza Besigye to do that? Why did we not allow Nnamdi Kanu to do that? Why did we not allow Abdallah Öcalan? Of course, all these things are very highly nuanced, but what happened at KICC on the 18th day of February, the year 2025, is something that is going to be a mark on our forehead. And already you've seen that the government of Sudan, operating from Port Sudan now rather than Khartoum, have issued a very strong statement saying that Kenya has gone against all international treaties and protocols, and they will want to have it dealt with. So that diplomatically, the relationship between us and Sudan has gone south.
How is Musalia Mudavadi, who happens to be the foreign affairs minister, going to clean up this? Because this is a mess, and I think will stink around for a while.
I hope that the cabinet secretary for the time being in charge of foreign affairs will seek counsel from his colleagues who are more seasoned in that arena. And once he has sought and obtained such counsel, he'll be bold enough to come out and speak to this nation and possibly have shuttle diplomacy to some of the offended capitals in order to repair the damage that has been done. I don't think that the opportunity has completely disappeared, but it is important that we engage in very well targeted shuttle diplomacy to restore the image of the country. And the sooner that is done, the safer. I also hope that going forward, the government of the Republic of Kenya is going to use the office of the government spokesman a lot more effectively with a view to having coordinated and coherent communication, both domestically and internationally. Otherwise, we have a cacophony of voices which send different messages, and you should listen to some of these individuals when they are speaking in their mother tongue. It is cantankerous. It is sad. It is unfortunate. It is bad for nation building. It's something that should not be countenanced.
And sometimes I keep wondering if we learn enough, because this is about Sudan. A few months ago, if I'm not wrong, Kinshasa called their ambassador. They recalled. The one that was sent there, the envoy that was sent by the president, has not been accepted officially by Kinshasa because of the issues we had with Congo. When such things happen, and now there's the war in Congo that is happening, when you look at all these factors around both Congos, what's our plan with that? And considering also Musalia Mudavadi had some time tried to bring sanity, and then I think we took sides, and then again, went back?
Once again, it is a question, and I may be repeating myself in this regard, of finding out and determining what is our foreign policy. And remember that we are part of a region, the East African Community region. And we are saying that the members of the East African community mean Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, Democratic Republic of Congo, Somalia, and South Sudan, and the other new applicants such as Djibouti and of course Ethiopia, that we want to confederate or federate. In other words, we are looking forward to the day when we have a single market, common currency, and ultimately political federation. And that requires trust. It's like marriage. You've got to trust your partners. And if we do not trust and we are not trusted, then we are not a good member of the regional economic community, and we delay, and ultimately, if we are not careful, will defeat and torpedo the entire enterprise. And it requires a clear understanding, and I hope that the Kenyan cabinet, as presently constituted, will be properly guided. There is no shortage of good people in this country. One of the things that I'm proud about my country is that in terms of human resource, we have good men and women. The question is, do we deploy them? Do we use them to good effect? And if they offer us advice and counsel and guidance, do we ignore them? And unfortunately, we do, with the consequence that we keep on repeating the same mistakes. They tell us they are landmines, yeah, and we step on the landmines deliberately with the dire consequences to the country. And this is the time that we must rethink, because when you're in a hole, you stop digging. The great Roman philosopher Cicero once said that if you do not learn from your previous acts, from history, then you remain in a permanent state of childhood. You may grow in body, but you do not grow in mind and actions. We must learn from the wisdom of Cicero.
One thing people may argue is that we had a relaunch of the Kenya foreign policy, I think, towards the end of last year. I don't know if you've gone through that content, and if you've gone through it, what does it say? Because then most people will argue, then how do we keep having all these blunders, yet we did a relaunch?
You know, you can launch things, but have you internalized what it is that you are talking about? When you say that your foreign policy will be trade-led, economically led, will be non-aligned and positively neutral as we ourselves positioned ourselves, then you are not practicing it. Then you are making the mistake, because foreign policy must also be seen from different levels. At the regional level, there are things that we surrender to the East African community in terms of trade. Are we going to deal with East African community issues coherently? When you are a member of the East African community, for example, and unilaterally you accept to be a non-member ally of NATO, are the others pulling in the same direction? If it is a question of trade, and we are talking about the elimination of trade, tariff and non-tariff barriers, are you dealing with it in a manner that is acceptable by the other countries, or you are entering into unilateral arrangements with the European Union over a long period? So the launch of things and good intentions without accompanying good action adds up to nothing. So I think that the time is now for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to really take her officers and perhaps call all our ambassadors and people in the foreign missions to have a thorough course on how we want to run our foreign relations. And I know some of these fellows who are serving as envoys, good men and women, but it is the dog that must wag the tail as it were. The dog must wag the tail, and the tail will only be wagged by a dog that knows how to drive away the flies.
Another question would be, do we have enough? I mean, we are not short of professionals in Kenya, but sometimes when you look at the political appointments made on the ambassadorial space, do we have enough diplomats in this country? And what determines or makes a good diplomat then?
You know, they are career diplomats, people who have grown through the system and understand the nuances and would make very good ambassadors. But unfortunately, because we have ethnicized public appointments, we sometimes appoint individuals because of political reward. We appoint individuals because we are balancing ethnicity and ethnic considerations. So you have too many round pegs in square holes, and they barely do not understand what is happening. You send them to an embassy, and they become traders importing clothes and other items. So when they meet their counterparts who are seasoned ambassadors, they cannot compete. Our problem is not shortage of good men and women. Our problem is the kind of men and women that we sometimes choose to deploy who have no idea what they are doing. A friend of mine from Uganda tells me, used the phrase that I loved. He said that some of these are individuals, you cannot accuse them of being intelligent.
That's quite harsh. But looking at it from a different now perspective, because the biggest population in Africa is the young people. And the young people are very active on the social media space. How is our usage of social media, even for government communication, impacting the country largely on the diplomatic space? For instance, the king that was supposed to come to Kenya, and Kenyans went online and have done emails to different foreign affairs ministries. So how does this impact? And then how best can, as maybe young people who want to be active citizens, be involved so that they also understand how that space works?
You know, if you ignore the thing that is called social media, sometimes alternative media is no longer alternative. It is actually the media. If you ignore it, you do so at your own peril. Because news circulates instantaneously and it is shared. And these young people, they don't read your traditional newspapers. No, they are using this media, and within a few minutes, something that is happening in Nairobi, Kenya, or in Kisumu, or any part of the world is circulated and recirculated and has millions of viewership, and it has an impact. That is the new world. So anybody that does not participate in that space in a coordinated manner and in a manner that is respectable will find that they are only playing catch-up. I know government employs bloggers, but some of the bloggers blog in such a drab manner that they are not believable. If they see no evil, hear no evil, and keep on repeating the same thing while the evidence suggests otherwise, then they'll not be believed. You've got to confront facts with facts, and you've got to be agile, and you've got to be truthful. One of the things that I've discovered over the years, if you make effort to speak the truth at all times, in the early days, you may be condemned and even insulted, but time has a way of vindicating the speakers of the truth. So this media is the media. Use it to good effect.
A while back, Kenya was rejected. Some people really don't understand why Kenya is becoming not a good negotiator when it comes to peace. Because like for Sudan, we were actually on the front line to promote peace.
Odinga.
Yes, but then we were rejected. What in particular is causing this rejection? We've seen AUC, we've been rejected technically. What is the main thing that you would pinpoint and say, this is actually it?
We are not believable. We speak with both sides of our mouths. And when you do that, you are considered to be duplicitous. You are not seen to be acting in good faith. And when you are not seen to be acting in good faith and is a matter of perception, when people through intelligence are capable of determining, or through gathered information are capable of saying, but they are telling us this, but on the ground they are doing this, then they will know that you are not as neutral as you say you are. And I believe that all these countries, through their embassies, do gather intelligence. And that intelligence must be telling them what it is that we are doing. And that is why, even in the last meeting, our president is the chair of the East African community for the time being. And when the meeting was being conducted recently, it is Samia Suluhu Hassan of Tanzania who hosted the meeting so that SADC was able to meet the East African community. One may ask why. We should have been the natural hosts for that meeting, but why? And these are things that call for humility. When these things happen, they call for humility. We've got to search our souls and ask ourselves, why is this happening to us? But when we engage in what I call orgiastic chest thumping, saying they can go anyway, it is our way or the highway, then we lose out. Humility is the mother's milk of wisdom. And it is time that we embraced humility as a nation through our political leaders. When we do so, then we will regain our position as the to-go-to country. I am afraid that we are losing that position steadily.
Do you think Kenya will manage to negotiate for peace in the Congo M23 war or conflict?
Remember that what we now have in that region is what has been christened the Luanda-Nairobi process. And I hope that with the new administration of the African Union, that it will be a multi-pronged approach so that it will not be a Kenya or Angolan affair. And I'm quite aware that a number of things have happened. President João Lourenço, who is the president of Angola, is also the rotational chair of the African Union. And we have the president of Kenya, who is the chair of the East African community. And we have a new individual at the helm. And I believe that this combined effort will help to lead to negotiation that will solve the problem. You know, there is the tendency to say that it is M23 and Rwanda and the DRC. The conflict is a lot more nuanced. There are over 120 armed groups in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. And some of us have suggested that what you need in addition to all these efforts is for the administration in Kinshasa to call an all-Congolese meeting. It can be midwifed by the Catholic Church, which is very strong in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and other religious and civil society formation, so that the people identify what the key planks are that could be the foundation upon which sustainable peace could be attained. So that all these other efforts from the AU, from the UN, and from the neighbors, SADC and East African Community and Central African Community will merely be the supporting cast. It is not lost on me that on 3 different occasions, the President of the Democratic Republic of Congo chose not to attend. He chose not to appear physically in Dar es Salaam. He chose not to attend the meeting in Nairobi, Kenya. He went to SADC, no problem. They are a member of SADC. He chose not to be in Addis Ababa, was instead at the Munich security meeting. All these things are things that are not very useful when you want to negotiate and you want the key personalities to be seen to be intimately involved in the process of midwifing peace. And peace is critical and necessary for all other things to happen in a positive way.
Would the fact that our president is the current chair of EAC, let's say if Congo is not happy with us, which we know, of course, at the moment, would it have an effect on those negotiations if they are to involve EAC?
You know, enmity cannot be permanent when you are dealing with the life of a nation, because the president is here today as the president, both the president of Kenya and the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo, but Kenya and the Democratic Republic of Congo will always be there. So for that reason, egos and other differences must be relegated, and we look at the larger picture. What sometimes is known in diplomatic speak as modus vivendi, live and let live. You create an environment where people who do not like each other choose to live together because it is in everybody's interest. So this is an occasion where we must have a modus vivendi or modus vivendi.
Interesting. Our neighbor Kizza Besigye was abducted in Nairobi, and of course he's been martial courts for, I think, 2 months now. Kenyans are holding demonstrations that he be released. What does that say about our relations with Uganda? Because Museveni yesterday said he's concerned about the law. He wrote a whole thread.
Yeah, I saw President Museveni's very long statement to his bazukuru, the grandchildren.
Yeah.
But I hold the view, I've read the judgment that was delivered by the Supreme Court. It was not a case filed by Kizza Besigye, by the Supreme Court of Uganda, very well written, in which they are saying that if one is a civilian, they ought not to be tried in a military court. I share in that view. So what I've heard President Museveni saying is that the trial should go on, and I believe that that trial should now proceed in civilian courts, and that whatever accusations that are being made against Kizza Besigye will come out in the open, and that the law will be allowed to take its own course. But the thing that has annoyed most people is the manner in which Kizza Besigye was abducted literally in Kenya and then rendered to the administration in Uganda. When you have a visitor whom you have allowed to get into your country, you don't deal with them in that manner. There are methods that are recognized in international law. If you want to have people extradited back to the country, you make necessary applications so that he or she has the opportunity to defend himself or herself, and then if there is sufficient evidence, then they can be taken to their country. But that did not happen in this case, with the consequence that the entire enterprise, and I'm using the word enterprise very deliberately, is considered to have been barbaric. Of course, the Kenyan administration even denied that they are aware. And if a country can say that they are not aware how a senior politician was taken outside of their jurisdiction, it calls into question whether Kenyans themselves are safe.
True that. I want to ask a very controversial question, in the sense that we know in West Africa, the Sahel region has been told to leave the ECOWAS bloc. Considering actually all of them are army juntas who just went to a coup. Is it possible for a country like Kenya to make agreements with these nations for anything? And if yes or no, what would be the implication?
First of all, remember, when the coup d'etats took place in Burkina Faso, in Niger, and in Mali, the reaction of ECOWAS was to say we are going to even use military action to restore what they considered to be democratic governments. But the people themselves in those countries rose up and demonstrated their support for the military leaders, because they were saying that the politicians are manipulating the political processes not for the benefit of the people, but for the benefits of the erstwhile colonizer France. And according to the Malabo Declaration, any country where power changes in an democratic and unconstitutional manner becomes a pariah state, with the consequence that those countries did not even attend the 38th summit of the African Union. But I choose to say that these were extraordinary means which were employed by young men and women in the military to depose unpopular regimes which had manipulated electoral processes. The question is, the reality is that they are the leaders. And from a legal standpoint, there has been a revolution. They have now formed their own Sahelian group, and they have created their own REC. And ECOWAS, fortunately, has said that when you want to come back, you can come back. They have softened their position. I'm saying that those are the legitimate governments of their countries, and we have a duty to talk to them. I've written to the newly appointed, the newly elected president of the African Union Commission, and the president, I've also written to the president of Rwanda, who is the chair, that one of the first things that must be done is to look at peace and security and the rehabilitation of countries which have been ostracized, because Africa cannot grow if we don't have everybody on board. As Ngugi wa Thiong'o once famously said, a house divided against itself cannot stand.
That's very true. I'll take you back to the story of not necessarily the Congo, but the issue of our president said that he spoke to Macron. And a lot of people reacted to that. This was in regards to the war again. Yes. A lot of people really found this a bit salty, considering the West African region basically suffered a lot of harm from France. So pulling in Macron in these conversations again from a presidential point of view, and looking at it from a diplomatic point of view with our West African nations, where are we in terms of how those nations are now looking at us?
You know, I was one of the people who took umbrage. And when you are talking about neocolonialism, and you are talking about one of the most vicious colonizers and neocolonizers in the country called France, and you are talking about an African problem, and we are talking about African solution to African problems, and then you say that I called the slave master in order to discuss the status of the slave. It was painful. It was painful because at the time that statement was made, South Africa or SADC was already involved in the process. People had expected the president to say, I called Cyril Ramaphosa, or I called Dambuzo Mnangagwa. But to say that you called Macron, and you've seen is the butt of jokes in the social media. So it's something that what I call a diplomatic faux pas, which ought not to be repeated again. Africa ought to solve our problems, and the more distant you are from these erstwhile colonizers, the safer you are. And remember, this is happening at a time when France is literally being expelled from all countries in West Africa, even the ones that you thought were kowtowing to them, like La Côte d'Ivoire or Senegal. They are going away. And then you say that this is the person that I'm on a speed dial with on matters relating to the continent of Africa. It was sad and unfortunate.
Your final message to, I think, mostly people on the diplomatic space and our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and of course the president, because he's the symbol of the country out there.
You know, we have a country called Kenya. This country is a country that geopolitically and geostrategically remains important in the continent of Africa. We have made a number of mistakes, but the time is now to reflect. The time is now to exorcise the ghost that is called the Nairobi mentality, and to embrace humility, and to use our good men and women who are out there, irrespective of their political affiliation, to guide us on how to conduct our diplomacy. In other words, I'm saying all good hands should be on deck. Their political, ethnic affiliation is not important. And I'm saying this by reminding us that when your house is on fire, you don't run after the rats that are coming out of the house. You ask everybody to bring in their fire brigades and to put out the fire. This is the time for my beloved country, through her leaders, to embrace humility, vision, and to speak coherently so that we are not seen to be speaking from both sides of the mouth. The time for duplicity is over. The time for clarity is now.
Time to embrace humility as Kenyans. And that was such a fantastic diplomatic class. I hope you picked a thing or two from the good professor. And Prof, something else that I saw very interesting. I did not know you're very good at...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a seasoned practitioner of martial arts. I've practiced martial arts since the year 1975. That is 50 years.
50 years.
Yes.
Older than a lot of Kenyans. So I was watching your video and going through YouTube, I saw a comment of someone asking how can they join. So it was good to put this
that is very good, because I started initially as a Shotokan karateka, then went into Taekwondo. But right now we are creating our own art, which is called Niabuntu. Niabuntu is meant to be an African art, with the Nia being the way, and Ubuntu being Ubuntu, I am because you are. And what we are trying to do is to fuse different moves from different traditions from the continent of Africa. But remember that martial art is about disciplining the mind through the body. So we will, in the next 2 weeks, be opening up spaces and inviting people to work with us as we develop Niabuntu.
So people should watch out for that.
Yes.
And stay at Alpha House. Of course, you will find more details. But if you haven't watched the video, go to our YouTube page and look at the kicks that the good professor is doing. I want to read for you another comment I saw very interesting. Someone said, no wonder you're still in great shape. So proud to have the prof in the martial arts world. Amazing. I just talked, you forget to talk about Kokowa in my country.
Yes.
The Republic of Niger. Thanks for the
Kokowa as a martial art.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, we killed all our African arts, and that is what we are trying to do, because when we come up, we are now going to have a small pamphlet that reminds us of the arts that we were practicing in different parts of the world.
Do you want to take maybe our politicians, people in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for that class?
Oh, yeah. You know, one of the things that people do not know, that martial art is about discipline, about taking care of your mind and body through meditation. And when you do that, you've got to discipline your tongue too. I always say that I want to be in a position that what I say today, if I watch it 50 years from today, even if I was mistaken, I would want to be associated with it.
Wow.
In other words, I can make mistakes, but if I have sufficient contra evidence, I'll be able to say, I made a mistake, but I made a mistake in a manner that was respectful of whoever I was addressing.
That's fantastic, and I think politicians need to register for that class. If you have not watched, go watch P.L.O. Lumumba, the Bruce Lee of African martial arts on YouTube. Thank you so much, Prof, for coming through.
God
it's been such an honor.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
This is the journey to one Africa.